She had rejected 712 peace proposals. Some came wrapped in gold-pressed treaties, sealed with the blood of royal houses. Some came at the point of a blade, generals threatening to burn her homeworld to ash if she refused one more time. She had refused them all, and she would refuse the next one too, except the next one didn't come with an army. It came with a single man, a single ship, and a single word he had not yet spoken. Her name was Veltharakes, and the galaxy called her the Unbroken Queen. She ruled the Threnai, a species evolved with a rare neural gift, the ability to taste deception the way other beings tasted salt or sugar. A lie, spoken in her presence, curdled in the air. Fear had a smell. Greed had a texture. For 300 years she had sat in council chambers listening to ambassadors recite beautiful words while their true intentions rotted beneath the surface. And for 300 years she had said no, because every single one of them was lying about something. The war had started over a mining dispute nobody remembered anymore. 6 empires, locked in a slow bleed that had outlived the reasons for it. Fleets the size of moons hung in the dark between star systems, waiting for an order that never quite came and never quite stopped being possible. Billions of soldiers had died defending borders that existed only on maps drawn by men long dead. And at the center of it, the Threnai homeworld, strategically irreplaceable, emotionally immovable, anchored by a queen who would rather watch the galaxy burn than accept a peace built on a foundation of lies. So when the proximity alarms chimed for the 713th time, the Threnai War Council expected another delegation, another fleet of escort ships, another nervous ambassador, rehearsing a speech that would die in this room like all the others. What they got was one ship, unarmed, unescorted, broadcasting on an open frequency in a dialect so plain and unpolished that the translation algorithms almost rejected it as a malfunction. This is Ellis Ward. I'm not here to negotiate. I just want to talk. I'm coming in slow, and I'm coming in alone. Shoot me down if you want. I figured that was worth saying out loud, since everybody else seems too scared to say what they're actually thinking. The council chamber went silent. Admiral Thresk, a war-scarred Threnai who had buried 2 sons in this conflict, turned to the queen with an expression somewhere between contempt and disbelief. "It's a trick," he said. "It has to be a trick." Velthara said nothing. She closed her eyes and let the air of the chamber settle around the broadcast, the way she always did, searching for the rot beneath the words. She found nothing. No fear dressed as confidence. No greed dressed as diplomacy. No hidden blade beneath the velvet. Just a tired man, alone in a small ship, saying exactly what he meant. In 300 years, she had never once tasted that. "Let him land," she said. The chamber erupted. Generals shouted. Diplomats from 4 other empires, present only because the negotiations had dragged everyone into the same orbit out of sheer exhausted habit, demanded explanations. Thresk slammed his fist on the obsidian table hard enough to crack it. "Your Majesty!" This could be an assassination, a bioweapon, a trap disguised as theater. "It could be," Velthara agreed, "but it isn't lying. And in 300 years, no one has ever come to me without lying first." She rose from her throne, robes the color of dying stars trailing behind her, and walked to viewport overlooking the docking bay. Far below, a ship the size of a child's toy compared to the war cruisers around it drifted down through the atmospheric shielding, running lights blinking a slow, patient rhythm. It looked almost embarrassed to be there. 6 empires have sent me their finest liars," she murmured, more to herself than to the room. "Let's see what an honest fool looks like. What none of them knew yet. Not the admirals, not the rival ambassadors grinding their teeth in the gallery. Not even Ellis Ward himself as he stepped off his ship into air that could kill him in 11 different chemically creative ways. Was that this single decision, born of nothing more than curiosity and 3 centuries of unbroken refusal, was about to become the moment historians would mark as the true end of the war. It would just take 5 more impossible conversations to get there. Every great negotiator the galaxy had ever produced walked into that chamber with something to threaten the queen with. Ellis Ward walked in with a thermos of bad coffee and a stomach full of nerves, and somehow that turned out to be the more dangerous weapon. The Threnai guards searched him 3 times. They found a translator earpiece, a half-eaten ration bar, a photograph of a woman who turned out to be his sister, and absolutely nothing resembling a weapon, a recording device, or a concealed agenda. Admiral Thresk personally supervised the third search, certain there was a trick hidden in the man's boots, his teeth, the lining of his jacket. There wasn't. Ellis Ward had simply walked into the most dangerous room in the galaxy, carrying less than a tourist might bring to a beach. "You came alone," Velthara said, once he stood before the throne, flanked by guards who could have ended him with a single gesture. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed as an observation. "Figure a fleet would just be another thing for people to be afraid of," Ellis said. "And everybody here's already plenty afraid. Didn't think adding to the pile would help." Thresk made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between a growl and a laugh. "Every diplomat who has stood where you stand has said something equally clever, human. Cleverness is cheap. What do you want?" Ellis considered the question longer than anyone expected. "Honestly, I want to go home. I've got a sister who keeps a chair empty at every dinner for the day I stop disappearing on missions like this one. I want this war to be over so badly that I got on a ship by myself and flew it into a war zone, which, in hindsight, might not have been my smartest decision. But smart hasn't exactly been working for the rest of you for the last 6 years, so..." A murmur ran through the gallery. One of the rival ambassadors, a sharp-faced Corvith diplomat named Sen Erix, stepped forward with barely restrained scorn. "This is absurd. The Threnai Queen will entertain a man with no fleet, no resources, no authority to speak for any government, while my empire's formal proposal, backed by 3 centuries of legal precedent, sits unanswered." "Your proposal," Velthara said, without looking at him, "smelled like a man who wanted credit for ending a war he intends to restart the moment it benefits him. This man smells like nothing at all, which is the strangest thing anyone has ever brought into this room." Ellis blinked. "I don't know if that's a compliment." "It is the closest thing to one I have given in 300 years, she said. "Sit. Tell me why you are really here, and do not waste my time pretending you represent a government. I already know you do not." So he told her, not a speech. He made it clear early on that he didn't have one, that every line he'd rehearsed on the flight over had evaporated the second he saw the war cruisers blotting out half the sky. But plain, halting account why a low-ranking cultural liaison with no formal diplomatic authority had spent 8 months calling in every favor he had to get a seat on a ship headed for the most contested border in known space. "I've read the casualty reports," he said. "Not the summaries. The actual reports. The ones nobody puts on the news feeds because they're too long and too boring for headlines. 6 years. 40 million dead. Give or take. Because nobody's bothered to actually count anymore, which says something pretty ugly on its own. And every single proposal that's crossed your desk has been about borders, reparations, resource rights. Stuff that matters, sure, but none of it's actually about why this started or why it's still going. And you believe you know why," Velthara said. There was no mockery in it, just genuine, unfamiliar curiosity. "I think everybody's so tired and so scared of losing face that nobody's willing to be the first one to say they're tired and scared. So it just keeps going, like a fight between 2 people who both forgot what they were originally mad about, but neither one wants to be the one who backs down first." The chamber was silent. Thresk's jaw tightened, his hand drifting unconsciously to the place on his chest where his son's memorial medallions hung beneath his armor. Velthara leaned forward on her throne, studying the small, unarmed, faintly nauseous human in front of her with an intensity that made even the guards shift uncomfortably. "You are either the bravest fool in the galaxy," she said slowly, "or the first honest one I have met. Statistically," Ellis said, "probably both." For the first time in 300 years, the unbroken queen almost smiled. Word of the humans' audience spread across 6 empires faster than any official communique ever had, and within a day, every government with stake in the war had dispatched someone to discredit him, outmaneuver him, or simply find out what trick he was hiding. They found out, slowly and with mounting frustration, that there was no trick. Sen Erix tried first, cornering Ellis in the diplomatic wing's narrow observation gallery, where the great curved windows looked out over a sea of warships holding position like hell breath. "You understand," the Corvith ambassador said, his voice silk over steel, "that you are curiosity to her. Nothing more. The moment she tires of you, you'll be discarded, and the rest of us will return to actual negotiations. Probably, Ellis agreed easily, which seemed to throw Eric's more than any denial would have. I'm not trying to replace you. I don't have a government behind me. I don't have a plan, and I definitely don't have whatever it is you got that makes you talk like that. I'm just trying to get everybody to admit something true before this whole thing blows up for good. And what precisely do you imagine that will accomplish? Ellis shrugged. No idea. But nothing else has worked in 6 years, so I figured it was worth a shot. Eric studied him with a particular contempt reserved for people too unimportant to be worth the effort of real anger, then left without another word. Though he did, notably, not report back to his own command that the human was a non-threat. Some instinct, sharper than his pride, told him otherwise. It was Admiral Thresk who pushed hardest, and pushed in the one way that actually mattered. 3 days after Ellis's arrival, the Admiral requested a private audience, not with the Queen, but with the human himself, in a spare officer's quarters stripped of all ceremony. You lost someone, Thresk said without preamble, the moment the door sealed. I can see it, the way you talk about endings. People who haven't lost anything don't talk about endings like that. Ellis was quiet for a long moment. My brother, 5 years ago. Not this war. A different one. Smaller. The kind that doesn't make the history books. But it taught me the same lesson, I guess. Everybody keeps fighting these things like the ending is the point. It's not. The ending's just where everybody finally stops pretending the fighting was working. My sons died in this war, Thresk said. His voice didn't waver. But something in his shoulders did. Both of them. I have spent 6 years telling myself their deaths meant something. That they died defending a cause, not bleeding out over a border dispute that outlived its own logic a decade before either of them was born. If I admit this war could have ended sooner, should have ended sooner, I admit they died for nothing. They didn't die for nothing, Ellis said quietly. They died defending people they loved. Same as anybody who's ever fought for anything real. The war not mattering doesn't make that not matter. Those are two different things, even if it doesn't feel that way. Thresk said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, the Queen tastes lies human. She has built 300 years of judgment on that gift. Do you understand what it means that she has found none in you? Honestly, it mostly just means I'm bad at lying. No, Thresk said, and for the first time, something like respect crossed his weathered face. It means you're the first person in this entire war who has had nothing to hide. Every empire, every general, every ambassador, myself included, has come to that throne room carrying some private calculation. You came carrying grief and exhaustion, and nothing else. That is not foolishness. Human. That is the rarest currency in this galaxy, and you spent it without even realizing its worth. That night, for the first time since the war began, Vel'Tharas summoned no ambassadors, convened no council, signed no documents. She simply walked along empty halls of her palace alone, turning over a feeling she hadn't experienced in 3 centuries, the unsettling, vertiginous possibility that an ending might actually be within reach, and that she might be the one standing in its way. On the 5th day, Vel'Thara asked Ellis a question no ambassador had ever dared answer honestly. Why do you think I keep saying no? They were walking the palace gardens, an act of casual proximity that had scandalized half her court and thrilled the rumor mills of 6 empires. The Threnai Queen did not walk with guests. She received them, judged them, dismissed them. She did not stroll beside them beneath trees grown from splice seeds older than most civilizations, discussing the architecture of her own refusals. Because saying yes means trusting that this time's different, Ellis said. And you've been burned enough times that trusting feels like the actual risk, not the war. Close, she said, but incomplete. I say no because every proposal that has crossed my desk asks me to trust an institution, a treaty, a precedent, paper, in other words. Paper does not feel guilt. Paper does not flinch. I can taste a man's lie, but I cannot taste the lie a government tells through him, layered 3 bureaucracies deep, until even the man delivering it believes his own deception. You are the first person who has ever asked me to trust a person instead of document, and that terrifies me more than any fleet ever has. Why? Because documents can be discarded without grief. People cannot. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully, the ancient trees casting long shadows across features that had not changed expression in front of an outsider in longer than he had been alive. If I trust you and you fail me, not through malice, simply through the ordinary human failure being one fragile person trying to hold together something far larger than yourself, I will grieve that failure in a way I have never permitted myself to grieve a broken treaty. Do you understand what you are asking of me? Ellis was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I think I do. And I can't promise I won't fail you. Nobody could promise that and have it mean anything. All I can tell you is I'm not asking you to trust that I'm special or that I've got some plan nobody else thought of. I'm asking you to trust that being tired of this is a good enough reason to try something different, even though trying is scary. That's it. That's the whole pitch. I know it's not much. It is the only proposal in 300 years that has not asked me to pretend to a confidence no one in this war actually possesses, she said. Every general claims certainty of victory. Every diplomat claims certainty of fairness. You are the first person to admit you have no certainty at all, only exhaustion and hope, and somehow that is more convincing than every confident lie I have ever tasted combined. She resumed walking, and after a moment, "So, did he?" "There is something you should know," she said. "If I say yes, if I finally, after 300 years, agree to a peace, 5 empires will need to ratify it simultaneously, or the 6th will perceive the gap as weakness and strike before the ink dries. Admiral Threske's fleet alone cannot enforce that timeline. Ambassador Eric's government will demand concessions designed to humiliate, because humiliation is the only victory left available to an empire that knows it cannot win outright. And somewhere in a command bunker on a world you have never heard of, a leader I have never met is currently calculating whether my hesitation is evidence that the Frenai are finally weak enough to be conquered rather than negotiated with. So it's not really about you saying yes," Ellis said slowly. "It's about getting everyone to say yes within about 5 minutes of each other, before anybody has time to get scared and ruin it." "Precisely. And I do not know how that is accomplished, because no one has ever come close enough to needing to solve that problem before." Ellis was quiet for a long time, staring out at the dying light over the garden's ancient trees. Then he said, with the particular tone of a man realizing he had just volunteered for something enormous, "I think I might have an idea. It's a bad one, but it's the only one I've got." The idea, when Ellis finally explained it to a deeply skeptical war council, was almost insultingly simple. Put every empire's leadership in the same room, at the same time, with the one person in the galaxy who could taste a lie the instant it was spoken, and let that fact alone do the work that 6 years of armed posturing never had. "You want to stage a summit," Thresk said flatly, built entirely around the threat of public humiliation. "I want to stage a summit," Ellis corrected, "where nobody can hide behind paperwork anymore. Right now, everybody negotiates through layers. Ambassadors speaking for ministers, speaking for councils, speaking for leaders nobody's ever actually met face to face. Every layer is a place for the truth to get diluted. Strip the layers away. Put the actual decision makers in one room, with someone who'll know the second any of them are lie about what they actually want, and see what's left when nobody can hide anymore." "They will refuse," Eric said, though with less certainty than he intended. "No leader exposes themselves to that kind of scrutiny voluntarily." "They'll refuse first," Ellis agreed. "Then they'll think about how it'll look if everyone else agrees, and they're the only one who said no. And one by one, they'll show up, because none of them could afford to be the empire that was too scared of the truth to sit in a room." It took 11 days to arrange. 11 days of furious diplomatic cables. 3 assassination attempts on Ellis's life that the Frenai security forces intercepted with an efficiency that suggested they'd been quietly guarding him far more closely than anyone realized, and one extraordinary moment when the leader of the Velkash Dominion, a recluse who had not left her homeworld in 40 years, agreed to attend only after Velthara personally guaranteed, in a recorded message broadcast all 6 empires, that the Queen who had tasted 3 centuries of lies would be present to verify every word spoken. The summit chamber, when the day finally arrived, held 6 chairs arranged in precise circle, with no throne, no head of the table, no symbolic hierarchy at all. a detail Ellis had insisted on over the strenuous objection of every protocol officer in the building. Vel'Thara sat among the six, not above them, a queen with no more apparent authority in the room than anyone else present, save for the one ability none of the others could counterfeit. The leader spoke. For the first time in 6 years, they spoke without scripts, without aides feeding them carefully workshopped phrases, because the moment any of them reached for a prepared line, Vel'Thara's expression would shift, almost imperceptibly, but enough, and the room would know. It was ugly at first. Old grievances surfaced raw and unpolished. The Vel'Cash leader wept, openly, over a home world that had lost an entire generation to a border skirmish that had stopped mattering before her own children were born. Thresk, president of the 9 military liaison, finally said aloud what he had only admitted to Ellis in private, that his son's deaths had been defending a line on a map that no longer corresponded to any strategic reality, and that he had spent 6 years unable to forgive himself for not realizing it sooner. And slowly, painfully, something shifted, not because anyone won an argument, because, for the first time, no one could lie their way around the exhaustion everyone in that room actually felt. It was Vel'Thara herself, near the end of the second day, who finally spoke the words that changed everything. Not as queen, not as judge, as one more tired leader in a circle of tired leaders. I have spent 300 years protecting my people by refusing every piece that smelled of deception, she said. I am beginning to understand that refusal, however well-intentioned, is its own kind of lie, a lie that's a protection and prolonged war the same thing. They are not. I do not know if this peace will hold. No one in this room can promise that. But I am no longer willing to mistake my own fear for wisdom. She turned to look at Ellis, standing quietly near the chamber's edge, the only person present with no seat, no title, no stake beyond the simple fact that he refused to leave until this conversation happened. Ask me again, she said. The question you came here to ask 6 days ago, before any of this began. Ask me plainly, the way you asked it then. Ellis's voice, when it came, was steady despite the weight of every eye in the room. Will you accept a peace built on nothing but the truth that everyone here is exhausted, and that protecting your people doesn't have to mean outlasting them in a war nobody actually wants anymore? The chamber held its breath. 6 empires worth of fear and pride and grief hung suspended in that single silence. Yes. One word. No qualifiers. No conditions appended to soften the weight of it. No diplomatic phrasing designed to leave an escape route for later regret. 3 centuries of unbroken refusal ended on a single syllable, spoken plainly, in a room with no throne. The reaction was immediate and total. Sen Erix, who had spent 6 days expecting to outmaneuver a fool, found himself unable to speak. The Vel'Cash leader, still raw from her own confession, simply closed her eyes and exhaled a breath she seemed to have been holding for decades. Admiral Thresk did something none of his soldiers had ever seen. He removed his son's memorial medallions from beneath his armor, set them gently on the table before him, and said, in a voice thick with something he refused to name, that he hoped this meant their deaths could finally mean an ending instead of merely another beginning. The other 4 leaders, watching the queen who had never once compromised in 300 years finally bend, found their own resistance crumbling in the space of minutes. No one wanted to be remembered as the empire that chose pride over the only honest peace the galaxy had been offered in 6 years. One by one, around the circle, the word repeated. Yes, yes, yes. It was not instantaneous after that. Peace rarely is. The treaty took another 4 months to draft, fought over by lawyers and ministers who had not been in that room and did not carry the same weight of sheer exhaustion the leaders themselves now did. There were setbacks. A border incident in the 3rd month nearly unraveled everything, until Thresk himself flew personally to the contested system and resolved it through a conversation rather than a counterstrike, a small act that would have been unthinkable from him a year earlier. There were skeptics in every government who called the entire summit a sentimental fluke, a peace built on tears and exhaustion rather than sound policy, certain to collapse within a year. It did not collapse. Ellis Ward returned home 8 months after he'd left, to a sister who had, indeed, kept a chair empty at every dinner for the entire duration. He did not become a celebrated galactic statesman. He had no interest in the role, and quietly declined every invitation to formalize a diplomatic career he'd stumbled into entirely by accident. He went back to his quiet liaison work, his unremarkable apartment, his ordinary life, and for years afterward would deflect any mention of his role in ending the longest war in recorded galactic history with some version of the same modest dismissal. I just said the true thing nobody else wanted to say first. Anybody could have done it. History disagreed. The Frenai called it, in their own language, a phrase that translated roughly to the unarmed reckoning. The moment a single person with nothing to threaten and nothing to hide had proven, to a queen who had spent 3 centuries tasting nothing but lies, that the truth, spoken plainly and without agenda, was the one weapon the galaxy's most powerful liars had never learned to counter. Vel'Dara ruled for another 40 years, and historians would later note that no peace she negotiated afterward ever required the elaborate verification rituals of the past. Trust, once it had been proven possible, became easier to extend the second time, and the third and the 40th. She kept, until the end of her reign, a small and unremarkable object on a shelf in her private chambers, a half-empty thermos of what Ellis had once described, with particular bluntness, that had started everything as genuinely terrible coffee. When asked in her later years what had truly changed the course of the war, she would not speak of fleets or treaties, or the careful diplomatic architecture that had eventually been built atop that first impossible yes. She would simply say, "A man arrived with nothing to offer but the truth, and it turned out to be the only thing none of us had ever actually been given." And somewhere among the stars, in a quiet apartment with a chair that was never empty again, a man who had never once thought himself as brave kept right on believing that anybody could have done what he did. He was wrong about that, but it was, perhaps, the one lie the galaxy was grateful he never noticed himself telling.